cult of wokeism. What is it? What's it doing? And who's behind it? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is another declaration of truth from your host, Terry A. Hurlbut. The Twitter files have wound down, but those who expose them have found better game. Michael Schellenberger, for example, is locked in on the phenomenon of wokeism. In 2 threads over the weekend, he shows it for the cult that it is. In fact, his insights have filled a book, which he introduces in the thread. And the most important of those insights is that wokeism causes the very harms against which it purports to fight. Before I start, I do want to shout out to the prime sponsor of this channel, which is Conservative News and Views. Link in the description. Be sure to check out the awesome CNAV Store. Scroll down near the bottom for that link. Lots of great merchandise there, especially this t-shirt that I have chosen for today, which depicts a bird trying to eat a frog, but the frog is choking the bird. And the caption, never give up. One more thing. If you like what you're about to hear, you can like this video. You can also click the bell icon to get a notice every time I come out with a new one. In fact, do you see the new icon, the heart shape with the US dollar sign in it? That's the super thanks icon. If you really want to keep these videos coming, click that and leave me a tip. Any currency will do, so long as it's legal tender. First, a definition. Wokeism takes its name from the misuse of the past tense of the verb to wake as a past participle. This faulty usage first appeared in the Black Lives Matter movement. Now it applies more generally and refers to awakening to the alleged oppressive nature of civilization against certain groups. Wokeism is in fact the application of critical theory. The specific application of queer theory, which is a subset of critical theory, is at issue in Schellenberger's first thread. He dropped this on Saturday, February 11, 2023 at 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time. But he's not making any fundamental argument against alternative lifestyles or even against the specific lifestyle called transsexualism. But he does say that the way certain clinics dedicated to the treatment of gender dysphoric youth have been pressuring their patients to opt for surgical mutilation and hormonal poisoning violates several ethical canons and brings harm according to its own terms. Several clinic workers in America and Great Britain have been sounding an alarm about such pressure. In this thread, he cites one each from the St. Louis Gender Center and the Tavistock Center in London, England. Before I get to the thread, I want to say a few words about the Tavistock Center. Established in 1947, it has been a force for attack on the sexual nature of human beings since its inception. That, according to a Dr. John Coleman, and I have a link in the description to his article on that center. My good friend Linda Gutschmidt mentioned Tavistock 4 years ago in her treatment of humanitarian hoaxes. I also need to leave another definition. Gender dysphoria means feeling bad about the gender you have. It happens, but the thing to do about it is to ask why. But a clinic that gets a big fat fee from transforming someone won't ask why. Hence this thread, which discusses these 2 clinics. The thread has 13 tweets, so I've left links in the description to the odd numbers, 7 in all. Each of them has embedded photographs and some document links, so here is how it reads. Whistleblowers in the UK and the USA are alleging widespread abuses in the treatment of gender dysphoric children with puberty-blocking drugs and surgeries. The U.S. witness says, quote, what is happening to them is morally and medically appalling, close quote. Likewise, the UK witness asks, quote, will we look back in 10 or 20 years and be like, what did we do, close quote. Treatment was based on little to no research or standards. The U.S. witness says that she was struck by the lack of formal protocols for treatment. The UK witness gives a timeline. Quote, in April 2014, the practice of prescribing blockers to under 16ers was introduced before data on effects was available. In response to a major increase in dysphoric children coming to the transgender clinics starting around 2015, both UK Tavistock and US St. Louis Children's rushed to prescribe drugs rather than pause to investigate potential reasons for the increase. At both the UK and US clinics, there was widespread evidence that the children were suffering from a range of other psychiatric disorders, mental illness, or disabilities, including autism. The clinics did not track patient outcomes. Now, as a former clinical lab administrator, I find that unspeakably inappropriate and negligent on those clinics' part. Says the UK source, quote, former therapists who prescribe puberty blockers admit they do not know how many children have since changed their mind, close quote. The US source says, quote, one doctor wondered aloud why he would spend time on someone who was no longer his patient, close quote. And again, I was a doctor myself, and I say that's a horrible attitude. Moving on. Clinic leadership retaliating against those who raised concerns. The UK source reported, the Trust's head of safeguarding said anyone who spoke out was demonized. The US witness wrote, the doctor said that my colleagues and I had to stop questioning the science as well as their authority. Whistleblowers in both UK and US say clinics caved into parents who insisted their children were trans, even when there was evidence that the parents were abusing their children, had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, or would rather have trans children than cisgender children who simply preferred their own gender for intimate company. In the next tweet, Mr. Schellenberger lists links to the source articles, one in the Free Press and the other in the Times of London. Then he goes on to quote several tweets to advance a very important thesis, namely that gender dysphoria is a social contagion, the kind of thing one can easily persuade a child that he or she has by citing the example of nearby peers and social media contacts. Peer pressure has a lot to do with this, and if any of you out there think this is absurd, consider this. Schellenberger cites a doctor who cut off two men's legs because they asked him to, not because their legs had anything wrong with them, but just because they wanted them cut off. The fancy Greek psychiatric term for this is apotemnophilia. Ladies and gentlemen, that directly violates the oath of Hippocrates. Doctors are not supposed to run around cutting off healthy limbs, even if asked. I mean, this is shades of Ronald Reagan as Drake McHugh in the movie King's Row, waking up to find his legs cut off and crying out, "Where's the rest of me?" Finally, regarding the Tavistock Center, Mr. Schellenberger quotes the source article. Clinicians recall multiple instances of young people who had suffered bullying on account of alternative preference and then identified as trans. So many times a family would say, thank God my child is trans and not simply one preferring one's own gender. How did a National Health Service subservice medicalize so many autistic and same-sex attracted young people, unhappy teenage girls, and children who simply felt uncomfortable with masculine or feminine templates, with so little knowledge of the causes of their distress or the effects of the medicine? Close quote. I have links in the description to 5 tweets in reaction to this first thread. One user cited a book recounting Tavistock's collapse. Another user speculated on the 3 motives for acts of the kind Schellenberg described. money, politics, or madness. One other user put her thoughts into an essay, saved it as an image, and shared it on Twitter. In 3 words, follow the money. Hold that thought. I'm going to return to it at the end. Finally, one father predicted that many of the children so treated will take legal action eventually. But Schellenberger recognized that this is only part of the problem. Wokeism applies also to climate activism and deliberate campaigns to raise racial tensions. To address that, he dropped another thread, which he began by quote tweeting the anchor tweet of Saturday's thread. Before I describe that thread, I want to shout out to a sponsor who can really help you through the economic storms to come. That sponsor is oursilverlines.com. You feel like you're working harder for your money just to get by? You are not alone. The fluctuating economy, employment issues, and unexpected changes in life have left many families struggling over the past few years. Collecting gold and silver can help shield you against many of these challenges. But if you're like me many years ago, you don't know where or how to start. Our Silver Lines helps by connecting you with thousands of members who are learning the secrets to creating and protecting true wealth by collecting precious metals. Whether you just want to collect rare and unique coins or take advantage of the business opportunities this company provides, they can help you learn to live an exceptional life. Visit oursilverlines.com. Learn how you can build a legacy to your future. Hey, now, the second thread has a total of 19 tweets. So again, I've listed the odd numbers, 10 in all. As I said, he begins by quoting the anchor tweet of the first thread. But the second thread goes far beyond that. So here it is. The evidence is now overwhelming that progressive climate activists, Black Lives Matter, and LGBT groups cause the very things they claim to be fighting: higher emissions from attacking nuclear and natural gas, more black deaths from attacking the police, and harm to LGBT youth. Since the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, the number of black deaths from homicides increased by about 3,000, and the share of U.S. murder victims who were black rose from 53% in 2019 to 58% in 2021, due to the demoralization and demonization of police. Emissions had been declining over the last decade, both in rich nations and globally, mostly due to the transition from coal to natural gas. But then, climate activists started shutting down nuclear plants and blocking natural gas production, resulting in more coal burning. And after LGBT people won their rights, radical activists commanded that all gender dysphoric youth, many if most of whom are same-sex attracted, be prescribed puberty blockers and surgeries, which are far more damaging than mere conversion therapy. Which I don't support, by the way, not the way it's done. I'm not suggesting that all climate, black, or LGBT activists cause harm. Some climate activists do advocate natural gas and nuclear. Some black activists demand police reform, not defunding. And some LGBT activists demand reforms to how clinics deal with gender dysphoria. But climate activists who advocate natural gas and nuclear, black activists who demand police reform and not defunding, and LGBT activists who raise the alarm about trans clinics are all very much in the minority and are often subject to harassment, deplatforming, and cancellation. And beyond climate, race and policing, and trans, homeless advocates demand that people in the throes of addiction, untreated mental illness, be allowed to destroy themselves on the street and become a threat to themselves. In every one of these movements, you will find activist leaders who display dark triad characteristics as Machiavellianism, narcissism, and antisocial disorder. Operating in authoritarian ways, entrancing emotionally vulnerable followers, and demonizing, scapegoating, and ostracizing dissenters. What's more, we have seen a blending of those movements with journalists in the corporate news media who routinely play the victim, a classic dark triad strategy, and demand social media censorship in the name of preventing harm. And as such, we have seen the profoundly illiberal woke movement rise out of liberalism itself and become its opposite. Where progressives used to defend free speech, be suspicious of the FBI, and criticize corporate media, they now demand more censorship. We are gaining an increasingly complete account of how woke dark triad activists created extremist emotional movements fueled by rising anxiety from social media and the unmet need for spiritual transcendence and social belonging to successfully bully institutional leaders. This is why civilized people undermine the pillars of civilization: law and order, meritocracy, and cheap energy. It's also why liberal people undermine the pillars of liberalism: freedom of speech, tolerance of different viewpoints, and schools and universities dedicated to truth. We frequently hear and make comparisons to past periods of widespread irrationalism, witch hunts, moral panics, McCarthyism, social psychiatric disorders, fascism, communism, and religious fundamentalism. Doing so is helpful in orienting ourselves. Wokeism combines many, if not all, of these past irrationalisms, including fanaticism, panics, and totalitarian behaviors. But it is also its own unique phenomenon that doesn't fit easily into analogies from the past. It requires its own careful study. I explore the financial, political, and religious roots to apocalyptic environmentalism and woke progressivism in Apocalypse Never and San Francisco, and since then have collaborated with Peter Boghossian to create a religious taxonomy for wokeism. Now I am working with colleagues to create a psychological taxonomy of wokeism, inspired in part by the late Polish psychologist Andrzej Lobachevsky's argument that totalitarian movements must be explained psychologically, not just condemned morally. Lobachevsky argues that dark triad type leaders take political power and then they create a pathocracy ruled by the sick. Resistance depends on the normal or psychologically healthy individuals who recognize just how dehumanizing the totalitarian leaders and their arguments and their agendas are. A great ideology with a mesmerizing vision and values can also easily deprive people of the capacity for self-critical control over their behavior. Every great ideology thus contains danger, especially for small minds. Unquote, Lobachevsky. And more. The pathological social structure gradually covers the entire country, creating a new class within that nation. This privileged class feels permanently threatened by the others, i.e., by the majority of normal people. Close quote. Hence the demands for censorship. That thread definitely struck a few nerves, but some users got the point. See, for example, there's a tweet by a user named Alice Caterpillar, who left a message, part text, part striking image, that reads somewhat like this, quote, "When I think of activism in the name of minority communities, I have this image of a white activist, who happens to be female in this picture, walking among a throng of adoring non-white fans, each longing to touch her. And I say to you white people, and especially you women and feminized men, leave minorities alone. They don't need your help. You make it worse, and then you leave. I am white, and I could say this and mean it. Mind your business." Unquote, Alice Caterpillar. Someone called her a racist for saying that. And then, get this, a non-white user immediately said that she was correct and that the other user ought to apologize. Two more users correctly observed that in the not-too-distant past, the adults were not so quick to rush to the doctors. Many adolescents struggle with feelings like gender dysphoria and so on. Ride with it, the adults would say. You'll get over it. And that advice usually worked. But now the experts are pushing treatments that change a body in ways one cannot always reverse. I have a link in the description to the second of the two tweets, since it's a reply to the first. And now, my analysis. These two threads clearly show that wokeism is a cult, as Schellenberger says, but it's more than that. Wokeism is a weapon of civilizational destruction. That destruction takes the form of engineered scarcity, deliberate divisiveness, and sterilization by deception. The alternative lifestyles at issue here all work against the production and rearing of children. Transgender surgeries and hormone treatments always sterilize the patient. The rest of that alphabet soup involves lifestyle choices that don't produce children, even if the participants remain fertile. Follow the money, one user said, remember? But where does the money come from? It comes from the denizens of Davos and others who think like them. These are the deep state, or the Western oligarchs, as the Russians are calling them these days. They either finance such efforts directly or finance elections of politicians who will legislate the funding from public treasuries. Under other circumstances, one would expect wokeism to fade away through attrition. But the denizens of Davos know full well that the movement they engineered cannot sustain itself, so they will try every trick they can devise to persuade people to adopt it. And if they cannot persuade, they will intimidate or force. Hence the censorship and proposals to incentivize wokeism and disincentivize its obvious. Because without censorship, people can compare notes and realize that wokeism is not only a cult, but also a fraud. Links in the description of the article, to the first thread, to Dr. Coleman's article on the Tavistock Center, to reactions to that first thread, to the second thread and its reaction, to my Declarations of Truth Twitter account, and to Conservative News and Views. I've also left links to the awesome CNAV Store and to ourcivilized.com, as I also mentioned. You know already about how to like a video, turn on notifications, and leave a tip. And on the end screen, I'm going to leave a subscribe link to my channel and links to 3 videos that I know I've done before treating the subject of wokeism and its subsets. This is Terry A. Hurlbut delivering another declaration of truth and reminding you to let the truth set you free.